that little lady's voice. All right, cool. So we're recording now. And I forgot to ask if anyone else has any issues with me recording. If you do, you can shoot me a little text message or anything like that. If there's anything that you prefer not to ever be recorded, you can let me know, because that can be a personal thing as well. And then the next is share screen. All right. All right, can you guys all see this? Everyone can see it? Give me a thumbs up for the ones that I can see of you. Some of you, I can't see you anymore. So, all right, cool. So this is, like I say, he created it, and it was specifically made for this camp. So you have to ignore some of the stuff that's on there. But Jeff Marino, Moreno, is who created this and went through this with us. And I thought it was just like a really great exercise to go. It was really interesting to go through it with a group of kids. They're all college kids, and they really brought some smart things to the table. I couldn't believe some of the ideas that they had, which were great. But the idea of it is your first, and I think at this time of year, it's really any time of year, it's like really important to go through this stuff. And you'll hear me often talk about like staying connected to your why do we do this? That's a really common philosophy and just in general over the last probably 10 years. But his was, as an athlete, what are your first principles? So what are basically your core values of why you're doing this sport, and what are the things that you go to? And whether you're Olympic athletes or your college athletes or your amateur athletes or whatever it is, that it's really across the board. It's all the same, which is fantastic, right? So not only can an Olympian apply this, and we did have an Olympian talk to us while we were there, came from this program 8 years later, she is in the triathlon in Paris. These exact, and part of her notes are part of this presentation later on, it's applicable for everybody across the board. And then we can apply it to sports, and we can apply it to life as well. So start your wheels thinking about what your principles are and what are those things. So it's like those core values for you, and you have those in your life and things maybe in your work as well. So start thinking them in terms of your sport and what you're wanting to get out of doing endurance sport, triathlon, some of it's bike racing, swimming, whatever that is. So this was, I'm just going to move this over here. Can you guys see this okay if I move you guys? I'm going to minimize you. Okay, I can't see you guys anymore, but all right, so this is just really interesting. And his philosophy, his big thing, especially because he's a physical therapist, is health equals performance. And you've heard me say this before. Actually, I was really, this right here was super cool for me to see, because way back in 2001, 2002, Scott Molina said exactly this to me. He said, if you can get 80% of your workouts done 80% of the time, you'll get to where you want to go. And I think you've probably all heard me say that at some point as well, is that we don't need to hit the high end of everything 100% of the time. But what we do need is to if we get 80% of it, 80% of it, 80% of it, 80% of the time, and you're consistent with that, that's when we're over time going to see your best performances, and really in anything in life, of the best version of you, of whatever it is that you're working towards, because we're all going to have off days. We're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to have times where we're not able to do that. But as long as you're hitting it 80% of the time, that's when we're really seeing that slow, it might even not even be obvious to you at the time, but that slow progression forward over time. It just starts to add up. It's like one brick on top of the other that is maybe invisible, but it's there. And that's the main thing. So you're starting to think about what are your principles. And this is, again, so really famous track running club, and it doesn't matter whether it's triathlon or it's running or it's swimming, or like you're an Olympian or what it is, but these ideas keep popping up, and they're all the same across the board. And I think that that's what's really important to remember. And as you dive into things and you're thinking about your own principles, is a lot of this stuff, it doesn't matter what it is that you're doing, but you want to stay connected to it so that you continue to grow and get better. All right, so consistency and well-being is something that is probably a huge foundation to continuing to not only get better, but just the quality of life that we want out of doing this sport. And for a lot of you, you're already really, really, connected to that. For me, if I'm looking at one of my major principles that is that's along these lines, it's consistency, lifestyle, which equals long-term health, which brings fun to my life, that is the good kind of fun that I want. And so that if you've got a notepad and you start writing down things, that is, if I'm looking at it and I'm sharing with you, that's really important to me. Keeping it super simple, right? Too many people are looking for that. We get bored really easy. We already know that, it's documented. We flip through screens. Our attention span is less than 30 seconds now. We want to make it as hard as possible or as complex as possible so that we don't get bored. And we forget that just being repeatable and consistent and connected to our basics, that's what's going to keep us moving forward. It's always going back to that consistency and repeatability in my mind. That's what's always going to make us continue to get better. So as you're thinking about it, like, what are your basics? What are those things that you're thinking about every single day that are going to keep you on the track that you want to be? Is it a wake up time every day? Is it a bedtime every day? Is it a really simple routine with your nutrition? Is it keeping your equipment within the skill level of where you're at and mastering right where you are right now before you move to the next step? Are we looking for something above where our level is just because we're getting bored before we've mastered the basics? So, always coming back to those basics is really, again, so it's basics and staying consistent with those basics that continues to see us moving forward. Really, really simple stuff. And like I say, stuff that we've all talked about before. And it's something that I'm always sort of drilling home, but to know, hey, this is not only at our level and on a daily basis, or if we're working towards just improving our lives, or we're working towards an Olympic gold medal, it's the same across the board. All right, you guys still all with me? Someone say something, because I can't actually see you guys anymore. So
yes.
Yes. Okay, good. Thank you, Sarah. There we go. All right. So the 3 C's, again, consistency, correct loading, and control. This is a big one. Okay, I keep talking about consistency and saying it over and over again until you guys ad nauseum get kind of bored of it. But correct loading. So that's one thing. Obviously, as your coach, I'm responsible for making sure we're getting the correct loading. And when you get anxious about, am I doing enough? It typically is, we think about it in the big picture of things, right? We've got to think about, you'll hear me say, hey, we're looking at the total load over time. And it might be over the week, it might be over months. For a lot of us, it's year after year. And it's that correct loading a little bit at a time, like we just said before, at your basics. We master those basics and then we move on to the next thing. So we wouldn't, if we're new at something, we don't want to be looking at the internet and comparing ourselves to someone who has been racing at a professional level for 5 years, right? That would be a mistake, because then the loading is going to be too much. And loading can mean a lot of things. It can mean intensity. It can mean volume. It has to be within your life, how much stress you have in your life. And sometimes we're going to push that boundary on how much that is. And then we're going to find where that limit is and we're going to bring it down. But there's a progressive loading over time with intensity and with everything. Really, it's really the big picture. And a lot of it can't even be accounted for in things like training peaks. So TSS and chronic load over time and all of this stuff. It's the other things in our life that also come into play, whether we're getting enough sleep and stress at work or at home. Just in general, some people handle certain things better than others, travel, nutrition, all of these things. So looking at that, okay, what is correct loading for me at the time? And it has to be progressive, basic, consistent, and repeatable, not only week after week, month after month, but year after year, right? Control. This is a big one that you'll probably hear me say in your notes a lot of times. There is such a culture in sport of always thinking we have to go after a PR. That's been created in a lot of these apps and everything, like things like Strava, which are great. They're great competitive environments. They provide a lot of great things. But remember that I see so often people going after, they're supposed to be doing an easy ride or run, and they see a Strava segment, and all of a sudden they're going all out. Right. And there's so much what that has potential of messing up is the correct loading. And then if the loading is wrong, then the consistency all of a sudden is at high risk, because if we get injured or we're too tired the next day because we went a little bit too hard, then so there's a domino effect, right? So it's this knowing when to put the gas pedal on and knowing when to put the brakes on is really necessary, especially as an athlete. But I think that applies across the board with life too, right? So as you're sitting there and you're writing things out and you're starting to think about, okay, what are some principles that are important to me? Where am I at my level? So what are my basics that I need to be continually getting back to every single day? What's my basic checklist? So these are my principles. In one column, you're going to have my principles and my values and what matters to me. And another one's going to be what is my basic checklist that I have to go back to that are my home basics. Is it a wake up time every day? Is it a certain type of meal every day? Is it, what is it? What are your basics? Make a column of that. And then understanding where the control is. So when do I go hard and when do I push it really hard? And when is the time to put on the brakes and say like, hey, is this going to mess up the loading, the consistency, and get too far away from my basics? Okay, so that's really, really important. This is some of what this was his list. So hopefully you're all starting to make lists. This is an example of a list that he made. This was his first principles. So you can kind of read through some of there. I'm not going to read them verbatim I'll give you a minute to just sort of take a look, read them. As you're reading through these, I want you to go ahead. You should be scribbling down some of yours, because when we get to the end of this, I'm going to have you all share a little bit and share some of yours. So, these are things. Remember, his very top thing was health and consistency, right? For me, I shared with you, mine is consistency and lifestyle, which equals long-term health and positive fun. Okay, so if you're starting to make your list, what is this? This is some of his. Okay. We went through the room and you'll see these different groups. We split the kids into a whole bunch of different groups, and then they had to, kind of summarize what they came up with. We're not in a position where we can sit in groups, but you're all going to share as well. And even us as coaches had to sit in a little circle and come up with what our list was. So you can read through this again. This was what we came up with and what some of the kids came up with. And what was awesome was if you read a lot of these, a lot of them are right in line with things that we've either talked about before or things you've heard me coach you through before, or things that, come up all of the time and keep us connected to that big picture, long-term goals of what we're trying to do as not only athletes, but people, and what we're trying to do with our sport and our lifestyle. So for me, yes, it's about sport and performance. Like in this group particular, it's high performance. But for me, it's more I went through stages and phases, whereas developmental, and then at a professional level career, and then into it more for lifestyle, and not so much in my best performances of my life, but now lifestyle and health and longevity. So changes over time. So this was theirs. And again, I'm not going to read them verbatim. I'm leaving it up here for a long time, so you all have a chance to review it, have a look at it. How does that compare to some of your principles? How does that fit with your basics? I really loved this one. This kid, Foster, actually said this: being in love with the process. The man who's in love with the destination will not go as far as the man who's in love with the journey. And I really love that one. And it came up, this week with Christina. Actually, I'll use her example because it's fresh in the team's mind, is that she was like, why am I even going to do this anymore? This swim's been postponed for days and I don't even really, it's like, what am I doing? And she threw out there, I love that, she's willing to share her journeys, is that, it's like, well, I really love swimming. I'm going to wake up and swim anyways, and I really love swimming. And so that allowed her to work through some very difficult stuff that was being thrown at her and able to achieve her goal anyways, even though, there's so many times where you talk to someone after a race and they have a laundry list of excuses of why they weren't happy with their race. And then you might talk to someone else who consistently is in the top 3. I'm good friends with Ben Hoffman, and he's consistently for a long time in the top 3 in his races in the height of his career. And you would ask him afterwards about his races, and he would say, oh yeah, no, it was pretty good here or there, or he had a good result, and he was kind of go through it. He would totally forget to mention, like, he dropped his nutrition, his cleat came loose, his saddle broke, he got a cramp at the here. It was like those things were just part of the day that he managed and moved through versus excuses of why he wasn't able to be in the top 3. Usually really successful people are able to perform despite the things happening to them. And so that also fits into all of this too. It connects back to what these principles are for you. All right, so the last little bit of this was just interesting. We had to teach them about fueling basics, between the difference between being runners. These were all runners versus being a triathlete. It's not really relevant to what we're talking about today, but it's just interesting on numbers and stuff like that. The amount of total hours versus being a runner versus being a triathlete at different times of the year and what their fueling was. So yeah, that was just like a different part of it. And then this was just sharing at the very, very end. Katie, she's been like a 4-time Olympian and was part of this program, and, was just able to talk to us, and a huge part of triathlon. And her husband, Tommy Tavares, leads this program and is part of the Talent ID. And, we talked a lot about, when we're looking at all this stuff and you're making these lists, the thing that stood out to me that I loved is the training bank account. So what's your bank account? And that's that whole, what are you putting in to that bank account that you're going to be able to draw from at any given time? What is that? Like, is it that habit and that routine that keeps you healthy over a long period of time? So is it that you choose to, make nutritional decisions every single day that set you up well? So they're all connected, right? Because we're going to have to draw from that bank account through the year. And so how are you refilling that bank account and making sure that balance? We do that when we budget as adults. We know that, okay, well, we can't overdraw to a point where we're to get ourselves in trouble, because then there's nothing left. So refilling that bank account to the point where we know, okay, we've got to, what are those basic foundations and principles and things that we come back to that keeps this bank account balanced well, so that we can be consistent over a long period of time. Yeah, so hopefully some of this, it's again, going back to simple things like skills, basics, those kinds of things. I'm going to stop the share here and bring you all back on. Right, this is where y'all get to get nervous, because you're going to all have to start talking and sharing. How many of you feel like that as you read through some of that, it was new for you, or completely you're reading it going, nah, these are like foundations that I live my life by? If it seemed like you're looking at it going, it was brand new, put your hands up. Nobody. That's good. Yeah, that's good. That's what I would hope for. So yay, Team MCC, because that means we've done a good job as a group, right? When you've got the very best in high performance bringing stuff to the table that is new, because to all of those kids, it was brand new. Now, granted, they're all college kids, but it's brand new stuff to them. And for us, it's like, this is something we're revisiting. But I think at each point in the year, I think at any time, it's like every quarter of the year, I feel like it's really easy to get distracted in our lives and fall away from this stuff. And so I think if you can revisit it over and over again, and maybe even it's just worded differently, or you redo your lists as it evolves and changes, because certainly things change, right? Your goals change, your skill level change, your experience level changes, your development as an athlete changes. So these lists that you make they're likely, they probably will change over time. So revisiting them is really, really important. All right, so principles. I shared with you some of mine. You saw them in the coaches list there. Probably half of those in that coaches list that I shared were mine. And I shared a little bit with you about what's important to me, which I said is, consistency, which means, is it repeatable for lifestyle and long-term health, which is very different. If you asked me this same question in 2004, it was all about being in the top 3 in every single race I did. Everything I did was about being top 3 in every single race and winning an Ironman. So the conversation I'm having with you in 2004 versus 2024 is very different, right? And so you can think about that for yourself as well. Like, how have you evolved and changed as an athlete? And some of the things are exactly the same. And funny enough, sport is a lot like even parents. Some of the stuff that I hear myself say and do now are things that Scott tried to teach me back then, but they didn't register. They just went right over my head. And I wished they did. I was like, oh, that would have been really helpful had that actually hit home back then. I probably would have done a lot better in some races. So, all right. So who has a list of principles and basics that they want to go back to, that they'd like to share with the group? Because I think that, that sharing like we did there, you saw all the kids groups, the coaches groups, and Jeff's specific list. I think it's useful for all of us because it changes for each person. Who has one they would like to share? Yep, go ahead, Emily.
Wait, me?
Yep.
Oh, okay. So I don't know if these are my perfect principles, but these are the principles maybe of the week. So I thought that every day doesn't have to be perfect, but showing up and being positive matters. I found myself at the pool one day to a guy who's super friendly, and he was asking me about something and was very chatty, and I'm not a chatty person in the morning. And I was just like, I'm so tired. I don't want to be here right now. And I was like, who is that person? That's not me. Because I love swimming. So that was one thing that I noticed. And then the other one is you don't have to be fast every day to be fast. I think like I tunnel vision into my days of like, oh God, you're running so slow and you're so tired. And it makes sense. Like I'm doing a lot. So just being patient with myself and knowing that like I'm fast sometimes. I don't have to be fast all the time. So
That's
those
awesome.
are mine.
Yeah, I love that. That's the gas pedal, right? And then one thing about that, what I loved about that is the being tired part. It's part of training, right? Like on purpose. The part of training is you're gonna get tired because we want to add load, right? And we're always adding a little bit more load over time or different stimulus, or which is designed on purpose to make you tired for a period of time. And then we bring back and recover, and then we nudge that forward. And so if you're always performing at your fastest, that gas pedal, and at your best, and that idea and that notion that people think that they always have to be hitting the top end of the range, they always have to be getting PRs, they always have to feel fantastic every single workout. That's not actually how it's supposed to go. And in fact, if that's happening, you're probably over the big picture not getting any better, because you're not getting enough load to actually be tired enough to be moving that needle forward. So it is absolutely necessary at some point. You're doing a long distance endurance event, right? You're even people who are doing a 10-second event, they are very sore and tired in massive points of their training blocks. So I think there's been a bit of a culture cultivated where people think they have to be hitting PRs all the time. They think they have to feel amazing all the time, that any sign of soreness or anything is a danger zone. And that's just simply not true. It's just, now, is there a point where it's too much, that appropriate load? Yes. And that's when we might pull it back for a day or two. and then we carry on and go forward, right? So I really love that. That's really good. All right. Who else has got one for me? Remember, if no one raises their hands, that's when I start picking on people and throwing it out there. So someone's got to raise their hand.
I'll talk.
Okay, great. Erin.
One of my things is just about like getting outside. I tend to have a lot of thoughts, and I think it's really easy to just sort of get stuck in the space that I'm in. A good example was like this morning, I went out and I rode my bike, and it was sunrise and it was beautiful. And so I noticed the sky. There was a coyote that like crossed my path, and then I saw like a couple of bunnies and like just things that are like simple that sort of get me out of my head. And camp is also a great example. Like I'm not out there riding, 100 miles by myself, but to get out there with a group and to cover miles that I wouldn't typically cover, I think, it challenges me, but it also just, I don't know, it breaks barriers and limits that I feel like I have otherwise. So I think it just really like opens my world to something different and new. And that's probably the biggest thing at this point in this journey for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you know what's so cool is like if you read, I'll post those lists in our group and stuff, but one of them was a challenging environment, right? Is being exposed to a challenging environment and a positive challenging environment, people that encourage you to try things that might be hard for you. And what happens when we do that is we gain a ton of confidence, right? And then we take that confidence not only into our sport, but into the rest of our lives as well. And I think that is pretty huge for all of us at this point, but for anyone, whether you're 15, 16, 21, 25, 74, it doesn't matter, all across the board. If you do something that you think, man, I couldn't do that, and it maybe pushes you way past what you thought, you're going to develop a lot of confidence from, not only within your physical activity, but everything else that you do in life. And I think that was literally on one of the lists, which was challenging environments and positive environments that help you continue to do that. So that's really cool. Thanks, Erin. All right. Anyone?
I can say mine.
Yeah.
It's kind of piggybacking off of that, but my big why right now is learning little lessons during training equals big lessons for life. So when you learn a little bit about yourself during training, like you can push yourself to go farther, or, you can do something that you don't think that you can do before a workout. For me, it teaches me that I can do that in life too. I'm in this spot in life where outside sport is really challenging and stressful, and just learning those little things during training, even if it's a 30-minute run, where I feel bad at the start, but I always feel better at the end. Knowing that I accomplished that helps me to, accomplish these things in life too. One of the biggest lessons that keep coming up for me, even in these I'm used to these longer workouts, and I've been only able to get in these shorter workouts lately, and learning that feelings don't dictate outcomes. So, what you feel before a workout or before a race doesn't have to dictate what the outcome of that workout or of that race is, and carry that over in life too. What I feel in the morning when I don't sleep, because my 9-month-old doesn't like to sleep, doesn't necessarily have to dictate what my entire day is. And learning those little lessons during training really helped me to power through each day.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. The thing I've noticed too, and you guys probably all experience this and notice this as well, is that when you're fit mentally from these challenges and have the confidence that you can do these things, and you're also fit physically, we're able to handle a lot more than most people, right? There's a lot of people that get really, really tired really quickly, and they just simply can't handle very much. And so you know, I think we're all at such a huge advantage that, like you said, when we're faced with anything, whether it be in a physical challenge that we're like, hey, I really want to get after this and I want to go as fast as I can, or as long as I can, or hard as I can, or whatever it is, but also that you have that skill to draw from, number one, mentally, like you just said, but also just the physical conditioning. A lot of people don't have the physical conditioning to be able to handle very much. And it gets harder and harder for them. And so that ties back to one of what I shared with you. One of my principles was that no matter what, at any stage in my life, I want to have the mental tenacity and physical conditioning to be able to handle what we know life is just going to bring our way. And so that's like, that ties back to the principles. Now, whether that ends up being some event that I enter and I actually have a ton of fun doing some, you know, crazy fun event that I did well at, great. That's a bonus that I got to do something cool and fun with my friends, for sure. But it also, in the big picture, if I look at my principles, that is what's like really, really important. So that's really cool, because Emily, you've been like, you're very fast and very competitive, and you can be at the drop of a hat in any moment. We know that about you, and know that you train for 3 weeks and go to a race, you're probably going to podium. You're just that, you know, you're a good athlete, but you're applying all of these things to just this other part of your life right now, which is something that we've talked about a lot in this group. And I think that's really great. All right, who else? It's like a jackpot. Throw the bing.
Well, I can add one. I would say one that I would like, it's on the principal list. I don't think I'm always very good at it. And that's focus on me. I have a really bad tendency to start going down a comparison route. And so it's kind of like my ideal principle would be to focus on me. But it's something that I have to continually work on. And some of the platforms like Strava and those sorts of things, I really have to be very mindful about how much I'm on them or how much I'm using them, and comparing kind of my workout to somebody else's workout or their volume or intensity and that sort of thing. So it's just, yeah, it's something that I continually have to work on. I think would be an ideal for me, but it definitely doesn't come naturally.
Yeah, that's good. It's the, you know, one of the things that was on the list was a positive environment, right? And knowing what is appropriate load for you. And that can be different for someone else. You know, someone's cycling load for them to get to a certain point and what their goal is might look entirely different, just in terms of physiology, and how they respond to training could look completely different than someone else. Someone might need to do a lot of intensity and not very much volume, and someone else might need to do a ton of volume and barely any intensity. And so it's, you know, that comparison thing, it becomes, is this a positive environment for me, which we can answer that question pretty quickly. But also the next question you should be asking yourself is that load appropriate for me? Because the load that's appropriate for me, like that, you can almost say like, that's great for that person. And I'm glad that they're getting the results that they need out of that for them. But does that actually work for me? It's like, you know, all of us have different shoe sizes, right? You're probably not going to try and jam your foot in my shoe because it'd hurt and then go for a run in it, right? So, and you know, I'm not going to try and put Sarah's pants on because they're going to be way too short for me, right? So it's like, we definitely need to make sure that when we're looking at other stuff, it can be a motivator and that can be fun, but does that shoe actually fit me? Is that appropriate load for me? So that's really important for sure. What are some basics? So we're starting to understand everybody's principles, and we all have a really good handle on that, which I love that. But what are some basics that you go to that keep you connected to those principles? And that can be really, can be very like hard fact things that you do every single day that keep that consistency and keep you moving in the right direction. So like I use the example, it might be a certain bedtime every day. Sometimes for some people, having a certain bedtime makes no sense whatsoever. They work shift work, you know, they've got kids, they've got all kinds of things. It's like, well, that one needs to go out the window. That doesn't apply to me. That's not my shoe, right? But it might be that they eat this certain thing every day, and it keeps them in a certain place. Or it might be, let's hear some basics that some of you draw from that keep you in this place. So everyone's doing a pretty good job of identifying their principles. What are some of those basics? Ben, I want you to share some of yours, because I think you've got, you know, a good handle on some of that stuff for you.
I was hoping you'd call on Sarah, but
she can be next.
yeah. I'm not sure this is a daily basic, but you know, my why is daily exercise, because I'm a much better person to myself and everyone around me when I get daily exercise. My second one is no injuries, because that allows me to get daily exercise. I got 2 teenagers that I try to keep up with. And my third one is consistent improvement. When I look at my workouts through the week, Marilyn's given me some strength workouts sort of throughout the year. And those are almost always the first that I look to drop when I'm tired or when I'm, you know, short on time. But this past year, I've been really diligent about doing those. And it's directly related to the no injury goal. And so every time I see a strength workout, I think I'm supposed to go backpacking for 3 days with my kid. I have to, I need a strong enough back. That's not the kid I'm supposed to go backpacking with. And I don't skip that session. So it's not really a daily thing, but it is a weekly thing that I think, you know, doing that strength session is going to make me stronger and less prone to injury. And so I can't skip it.
Yeah, it's great. And I'm sure as you guys are all listening, you can see all the connections of these things, right? Like that we're talking about, how they domino from one thing to the next, right? It's like, it's as simple as, hey, I'm going to commit to myself and make a promise to myself that I'm going to get these done, because it adds up to this over time, and then it equals this, and it gives me this, right? And so
I was just happy to hear I wasn't the only one that was the first thing that they would drop.
we're endurance athletes. That's usually the first one to go. No one who picks endurance sports loves being in a gym, or you'd all be weightlifters. so
That's why I was cheering. I was like, thank God, I am not the only one.
Yeah, not too many endurance athletes are like, yay, I'm gonna lift weights. Most of them are like, oh, I hate weights. So that's fair. But yeah, you know, these are all, so you're starting to see why these are so closely connected. And then they do all funnel back to events that we like to do. And when we do choose to do an event and go fast or far, or push our boundaries, or go after something that we think is not possible for us and achieve them, again, they all circle back, right? Like it comes back to, oh, confidence, right? Like I got that confidence to being able to do that. And so they all are really, really intertwined. Nate, what's some basics for you?
I think I don't have much routine. And by the way, I'm kind of new to the group, so hi everybody. I'm Nate. I am an ER doctor, so I'm shift work and have schedules that are just very sporadic, and I have a lot of random days off and a lot of random schedules. So the one thing that has been a very basic thing that I've latched onto is just every morning getting up and making my morning coffee. And that is kind of like one routine that I can actually hang on to, because some days I am up till 2 a.m. and some days I have to be at work at 7 a.m. and some days I work night shifts. So no matter what time I wake up, that's the one thing that I can rely on that is going to start my day, where I can focus on what workouts do I have to do? Am I working or am I not working? And then focusing on the workouts that I do are really meditative for me for relieving stress from work. So I try to keep that. That's part of like my principles, I guess, is relieving stress from other parts of my life and specifically work. That's what really keeps me going. And so that essentially it's just usually just morning coffee and maybe some toast or something. But like that's my time to like sit down, plan out the day, figure out what I'm gonna do, and then just execute after that.
Yeah, it's great too. You know what's so cool about knowing these, and like most people don't even take the time to identify this stuff, but once you've identified it, it's so obvious. The great thing about this is that then when you start to fall away from them, you can recognize it, right? You'll recognize like, oh man, I'm not like it's been weeks and I haven't been doing that. And then you'll notice, you'll have a kind of a look around at all the other things happening in your life and realize, well, they're all a little bit off or amiss or not going in the direction that I want either. Like it might be working towards some kind of personal improvement within your sport. It might be something in your job. It might be something in your family, whatever. But if we don't take the time to identify what these things are, then we have no idea when we're going off the rails, right? But because we take the time as a team to really think about these things, make these lists and identify them, it becomes so obvious really quickly when you're going off the rails, right? And you can self-correct right away. And where else does that skill come into play is when we are in these events and we've worked really hard to be somewhere and try and do our best. And, when we know these types of things and we're in there, that skill, that basic skill of identifying when you need to troubleshoot and make a decision for yourself to fix it has already been developed on a daily basis, right? So again, like all these things are connected, right? And if we practice this skill all of the time and we just go back to these little things, like I say, we should all be revisiting this like once every 3 months, like, okay, we've had these conversations in lots of different formats. And if we keep going back to them, how have I changed? How have I evolved? What are my basics? Am I staying connected to them? Have they slightly changed? Have I come a little off the rails? So not only does it help like day to day, but it absolutely even helps in critical moments when you're doing something high intensity at work, when you're out on a backpacking trip, when you're just in a train of thought and doing a workout. Like you mentioned, like, oh, we don't need to decide what this workout's going to go like right now. You might be in the middle of a rep that you think is like killing you and super hard, but now you've been practicing that skill of, I know how to troubleshoot. I know how to settle into this. I know how to keep myself from going off the rails, and I can still stay connected to what it is I want to achieve because it's important to me, right? And so all these all fall in line. So yeah, these basics. So not only the principles, but the basics of what am I doing every single day? Sarah, Ben wants to hear what yours are. Ben specifically.
Well, Marilyn always sees my morning routine, which is obviously everyone should follow this. You have to start with a diet Red Bull, followed by a diet Coke Zero. And then you can get started with your day. If you want, you can make coffee because you're awake by then.
You're really firing.
That's pretty much how I start my day, every day. And let's see. Obviously for me, consistency is my main thing. I would have to say, even though I've now been doing triathlons for now over 20 years, I think the beginning of every workout is hard. It doesn't matter what workout it is. It could be an easy run and it's hard. Be a hard run and it's hard. So I think that the main thing is just for me, knowing that it's going to get better, whatever I'm doing. I mean, hopefully, if not, just going through it and trying to get as much of it done as I can. But I think the main thing I've learned is to get out there and work on it. And hopefully I'll be, my goal is to be like Volker over there and still doing this and well, maybe a few less races than Volker, but still getting out there and doing it and doing everything that I want to do when I'm a little older.
Yeah,
also I was doing a ride this weekend that was 124 miles or whatever, and there are only a few of us doing that, and only a few of us doing the last part of it. And I started talking to this guy, and he was in his 80s doing it. So I was like, "Oh my God, you're my idol." That's because literally probably only 20 people were doing the longest distance, and if I could be like that, that'd be great.
Amazing, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is that rule, like 80% of the time gets you 100% to where you want to go, right? Like we all kind of lock into that. And that's, always remember that when we think we have to be 100% perfect all the time. And remember that the vocabulary we use with ourselves over and over again as well. We've talked about this, that has a really big influence. So that positive environment, a challenging environment, a positive environment, but a positive environment within your own head too, right? So yeah, who we surround ourselves with and where we go and the people that they influence that they have on us. But probably the biggest environment that has the highest impact on each one of us is what we tell ourselves every single day. So you want to make sure that the conversation that you're having with yourself and what those words are powerful things. And so what words you use all the time for yourself every day. And what's interesting for me is I have an outside bird's eye view. I can see that's why I always tell you to write notes, because a lot of you might not even notice the words that you use every day when you write notes are the same. And so I can notice a pattern and help you and say, hey, this is what you keep telling yourself every day. I did that for a period of time, and I had a friend call me out on it, which was awesome, is I kept saying I was too old. I was like, oh, I'm old. I didn't even know I was doing it. I had no idea I was saying it. And I guess I was saying it all the time. And they just were like, they totally called me out on it. And I was like, oh, dang. And now I was like, okay, I need to correct that. And because that environment, that positive environment, yes, our peers and the people we associate ourselves with and who we lean on and where we go every day, but that environment in our own mind is super powerful too. So really good there. So might be, you start in your basics, you look at it and go, what is something that that I need to incorporate to make sure that every single session feels, not every single session, but every, like I'm setting myself up in the most positive, supportive environment every single time I start. So it's a good one too. All righty. So we're almost right at the top of the hour here. And I would love anyone who has any very closing thoughts or last minute things that they want to share, or any last minute questions that they have. I picked this topic just because I know it's something that we have visited frequently, but I know that what was cool for me to share with you is that it's not common in a lot of other teams, but it's very common in our team. And it was great to see it right on the front edge in an environment like the Olympic Training Center. Like that was the first thing that they wanted to do to set the culture for these kids that are being recruited to be the next Olympic cycle. And so, having this stuff to go back on and set your foundation on and visit these lists all the time. And I'll share these lists in the group so you can read them and you can go back and kind of revisit your lists. It's like, that's pretty cool that we get to do that. And we get that as part of our just daily, our daily, like I say, reflection to say, hey, what's my principles? What are my basics? How am I going to stay consistent? What's my positive environment? Like all these questions that we ask ourselves and make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success, not only in sport, but in everything that we do. So any closing questions or thoughts? Can you raise your hand?
I just had a really cool set of experiences recently where I had been ignoring on the runs all of the arm carriage drills and hop and holds and little fast cadence things, or on the strength workout, Marilyn had me do like 80 cat cows, some crazy number of cat cows, and I would do like 20. But in the last couple months, I've tried to do all of those drills, and by the 80th one, I have so much more movement in my back, and my run had fallen away. But just focusing on those things that I didn't think mattered a whole heck of a lot has come back. So I just thought it was pretty cool that doing the whole workout is actually helpful.
That's awesome. Yeah. 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 And you know what? We actually even talked about that with the kids, is that each one of them has like a little routine, and we all have this too, like a little tiny routine. And it's while we're watching the Olympics right now, you can watch each athlete before they perform. They have a routine that they do to set themselves up for their best performance. And it's repeated over and over and over again. And so there's little activation things that people do that fall into their principles list. It's like some of the kids were like, oh, every time before I run, because these are all scholarship distance runners. And they, they're like, oh, one kid was like, I do 10 leg swings every single time before I run, and then boom, I'm off. And the other one was like, oh, I do, this stretch every single time. I stretch my calves out every single time, and then off I go. And so like they have these little basics and routines and are part of their principles that worked for them, that kept them healthy enough to keep running the mileage that they need to keep their scholarship, blah, blah, blah. Like it all dominoes, right? So that's really great, is that you're like, oh, if I just stick to doing the whole workout, the area that I feel like is a high risk area for me, my back, it gets better. And then I'm able to carry the backpack and do this with my kids and my quality of life. So all of these things, they have this huge domino effect. So really great example. Thanks for sharing that, Ben. Cool beans. All right. I know I didn't get to address everybody. I know everybody didn't get to share, but I really appreciate you all being here. I know your time's super valuable. Hopefully you got one thing out of it, and it was worth your time. So we will, if you want to share some of your lists in the group, please do. I'll post the actual talk in the group as well, and this recorded version. Again, I just ask that you guys don't, go blast it all over the internet or whatever. And yeah, I'm really grateful that Jeff was willing to share this with us. If you ever get a chance to meet him one day, he's pretty knowledgeable physical therapist and strength training coach in the Olympic space. So maybe we'll have him at a camp one day or something like that. But yeah. All right. Thank you so much, you guys. Thank you for your time. Good to see all your faces, and definitely continue the conversation in the group chat if you can.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks.